The invitation from Lady Pemberton arrived on a Tuesday morning, written in her distinctive violet ink and bearing the familiar scent of lavender that had always accompanied her correspondence. "My dear Captain Hastings," it read, "I find myself in need of sensible company at Greystone Manor. There have been peculiar occurrences that would benefit from your steady perspective. Do bring your Belgian friend if he is available." I confess the phrase "peculiar occurrences" intrigued me more than it should have. Lady Pemberton was not given to flights of fancy, having managed her late husband's considerable estate with remarkable efficiency for the past 5 years. When I telephoned to accept, her voice carried an unusual tension. "The servants are speaking of ghosts, Hastings. Absolute nonsense, of course, but it has everyone quite unsettled. There's to be a small gathering this weekend, just family and a few close friends. I should value your opinion on certain domestic matters." Greystone Manor in late October possessed that particular melancholy beauty of the English countryside preparing for winter. The ancient stone walls seemed to absorb the grey afternoon light, while the formal gardens lay shrouded in mist that refused to lift despite the absence of rain. Lady Pemberton received me in the morning room, her usual composure intact, though I detected a tightness around her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "You must think me foolish," she began without preamble, "but there have been sightings. A figure at the conservatory windows after midnight, always in the same spot, always facing inward as if observing the house. The staff are convinced it's Sir Reginald's spirit, returned for some unfinished business." The other guests had already arrived. Miranda Pemberton, Lady Pemberton's stepdaughter, possessed her father's sharp intelligence, but wielded it with less discretion. Her greeting was cordial enough, though I sensed undercurrents of resentment toward her stepmother. Dr. Thornfield, the family physician, struck me as a man carrying the weight of professional secrets, while Mr. Blackwood, the solicitor, maintained that careful neutrality common to his profession. The most intriguing member of our small party was Colonel Ashford, recently returned from India, whose restless energy and frequent glances toward the garden suggested a man with something pressing on his mind. His connection to the family remained unclear, though Lady Pemberton's manner toward him hinted at shared history. Dinner conversation remained determinedly ordinary until Miranda, with apparent innocence, mentioned the threatening letters her stepmother had been receiving. "Such dramatic language," she observed, helping herself to wine. "All that talk of sins requiring payment and debts coming due. Quite Gothic, really." Lady Pemberton's face went rigid. "Miranda, please. But surely Captain Hastings should know if he's to help us understand these manifestations. After all, the letters began arriving just before the sightings started." Dr. Thornfield cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps we might adjourn to the drawing room. The evening air has turned quite chill." The drawing room commanded an excellent view of the conservatory through its tall French windows. As we settled with our coffee, Colonel Ashford positioned himself where he could observe both the garden and his fellow guests, a habit I suspected developed during his military service. It was precisely at 10:30 when we saw it. A pale figure, indistinct but unmistakably human in form, standing motionless beyond the conservatory glass. The apparition remained visible for perhaps 30 seconds before dissolving into the mist-like smoke. Miranda gasped audibly. Dr. Thornfield fumbled for his spectacles. Mr. Blackwood muttered something about optical illusions, but his voice lacked conviction. "There," Lady Pemberton whispered. "You see? Always in the same place, always watching." Colonel Ashford was already moving toward the French doors. "I'll investigate the grounds," he announced, but Lady Pemberton caught his arm. "No, the last person who went out after seeing it." She stopped abruptly. "What happened?" I asked. Before she could respond, a tremendous crash echoed from the direction of the conservatory, followed by the unmistakable sound of splintering glass. We rushed toward the noise, our footsteps echoing through the corridor. Lady Pemberton lay among her prized orchids, motionless, a look of absolute terror frozen on her face. The conservatory's glass door hung in shattered fragments, and there, placed deliberately upon her chest, was a single white rose, a flower that grew nowhere in the grey stone gardens. As I knelt beside her still form, I found myself thinking of Poirot's often repeated observation that the most supernatural mysteries invariably have the most human solutions. Tomorrow, I decided, I would telephone London. Dr. Thornfield knelt beside Lady Pemberton with professional composure, though his hands trembled slightly as he felt for a pulse that would never return. "Heart failure," he pronounced after a thorough examination, though the circumstances are most peculiar. "Her pupils are severely dilated, and there's an unusual odor, sweet, almost floral, but not from any perfume I recognize." "Poison?" Mr. Blackwood inquired with characteristic directness. "Possibly. The symptoms suggest some form of cardiac stimulant administered in lethal quantity, combined with the shock of seeing that apparition." He gestured helplessly at the shattered conservatory door. Colonel Ashford had been examining the broken entrance with military precision. "Glass fragments are scattered inward," he observed, crouching carefully among the debris. "Whatever shattered this door came from outside, yet there are no footprints in the soft earth beyond the threshold. Most curious." Miranda stood frozen. In the doorway, her earlier bravado completely evaporated. "The white rose," she whispered, pointing at the pristine bloom resting on her stepmother's chest. "We haven't grown white roses since Papa died. He said they were for mourning, planted them at Mother's grave." I found myself studying that inexplicable flower with growing unease. It was clearly a hothouse specimen, its petals unfurling in perfect symmetry, utterly unlike the hardier varieties that dotted Greystone's gardens. Its very presence here, so deliberately placed, spoke of calculated malice. "We must summon the authorities immediately," Mr. Blackwood declared, already moving toward the telephone. Within the hour, Inspector Davies arrived with a single constable, a portly, well-meaning man clearly overwhelmed by the unusual circumstances. His questions were perfunctory, his conclusions disappointingly simplistic. "Death by natural causes," he pronounced, brought on by shock. The shattered door merely an unfortunate structural failure, possibly wind-related. "The ghost sighting?" I pressed. "Mass hysteria, Captain. These old houses, dark nights. Imagination runs wild." He dismissed the supernatural element with a wave of his hand, missing entirely the methodical intelligence behind the evening's events. While Inspector Davies conducted his cursory examination, I retreated to the library and placed a crucial telephone call to London. Poirot answered on the third ring, his voice characteristically precise. "Ah, Hastings. To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure at such an hour?" "Poirot, it's Lady Pemberton. She's dead. At Greystone Manor." A pause. "Indeed. And how has this unfortunate event transpired?" I recounted the evening's sequence, the threatening letters, the apparition at the conservatory window, the sudden crash, and our discovery of Lady Pemberton with that enigmatic white rose. I emphasized the peculiar medical symptoms Dr. Thornfield had observed and the inspector's rather inadequate conclusions. "A white rose, you say? Not from the garden?" "Mon Dieu, Hastings, you present me with a most intriguing puzzle. This apparition in the window, a distraction, perhaps, or something more deliberate?" I could practically hear him stroking his magnificent mustache. "Do the local authorities possess the finesse for such delicate matters?" "Hardly. They're convinced it's accidental death, nothing more sinister." "Then it is settled." "The little grey cells, they demand satisfaction. I shall arrive on the morning train. Meanwhile, observe everything, trust no one, and ensure our mysterious phantom claims no additional victims." The remainder of the night passed in tense vigil. Inspector Davies declared the conservatory off-limits and stationed his constable outside, while the rest of us were confined to the drawing-room under the pretense of providing comfort. Miranda had composed herself with remarkable speed, occasionally casting speculative glances at Colonel Ashford. The colonel himself remained withdrawn, nursing brandy and staring into the fire. Mr. Blackwood made several attempts to contact his London office, muttering about legal obligations and estate security. Dr. Thornfield maintained professional distance, though I noticed him studying each of us with unusual intensity. When Miranda mentioned the threatening letters, his reaction was particularly telling. "Those letters you spoke of at dinner," I ventured. "Might they provide insight into tonight's tragedy?" "Destroyed," Miranda replied too quickly. "Stepmother burned them last week. Said they were merely ravings from some disturbed individual." "How convenient," Colonel Ashford muttered, earning sharp looks from both Miranda and the doctor. As dawn approached, I reflected on the evening's carefully orchestrated events. The ghost sighting had served its purpose perfectly, creating terror that would accelerate Lady Pemberton's heart rate, making any poison work more efficiently. The shattered door suggested supernatural intervention while concealing the killer's actual method. The white rose remained the most deliberate clue, a calling card left by a mind far more cunning than Inspector Davies could fathom. Greystone Manor had become a stage for deadly theatre, and its most discerning critic would arrive with the morning train. Hercule Poirot arrived at Greystone Manor precisely at 9:30, stepping from the hired motor car with that characteristic precision that marked every aspect of his existence. His small, compact figure was immaculate despite the morning's journey, patent leather shoes gleaming against the damp gravel, his dark suit pressed to perfection, and his magnificent mustache waxed to military precision. He surveyed the ancient manor with those penetrating green eyes that missed nothing, taking in the Gothic stonework, the mist-shrouded gardens, and the general atmosphere of genteel decay that seemed to permeate the English countryside. "Bonjour, mon ami," he greeted me warmly, though I detected that familiar gleam of professional interest already kindling in his expression. "So we have a mystery most intriguing, n'est-ce pas? A ghost that kills, a rose that appears from nowhere, and a lady who dies of fear. The little grey cells, they are already most stimulated." Inspector Davies, who had remained at the manor to oversee the removal of Lady Pemberton's body, regarded Poirot with barely concealed skepticism. The portly inspector possessed that particular brand of English confidence that viewed foreign methods with automatic suspicion. "Monsieur Poirot," Davies began, extending a hand that Poirot shook with delicate precision. "I've heard of your reputation, naturally. Though I must say, we have the matter well in hand. Clear case of natural death, brought on by shock. These old ladies and their nervous constitutions, tragic certainly, but hardly mysterious." Poirot's smile remained perfectly cordial as he began his examination. "Indeed, Inspector, and yet Captain Hastings' account suggests a rather more theatrical demise. Such embellishments are rarely associated with mere accidents, are they not?" Unlike Davies's cursory investigation, Poirot moved through the shattered conservatory with methodical precision. He knelt among the glass fragments, examining their distribution with a magnifying glass produced from his waistcoat pocket. His keen eyes catalogued every detail. The positioning of the orchid pots, the angle of Lady Pemberton's fall, and most particularly, the white rose that still rested where we had discovered it. "Très intéressant," he murmured, carefully lifting the bloom with his handkerchief. "Observe, Hastings. This rose has been cut with professional skill. See the clean diagonal slice at the stem's base? This is the work of an experienced gardener, not someone who merely plucked a flower in haste. Also, the scent here, orchids, yes, but something else. A sweetness that is not natural." He moved to examine the shattered door frame with particular attention. "The glass fragments, Inspector, you noted their distribution. Blown inward, mostly. Wind damage, I'd say. Ah, but observe more carefully." Poirot pointed delicately with his handkerchief. "That large triangular piece near your shoe, Hastings, It is from the upper pane. The pressure was applied high and from outside, yet no footprints disturbed the soft earth beyond the threshold. The mist fell late. The ground kept the memory of feet. It remembers none. Poirot then positioned himself in the drawing-room, recreating the previous evening's arrangement. He stood where Lady Pemberton had sat, then shifted to Colonel Ashford's position by the fire, analyzing the sight lines to the conservatory windows. "The arrangement is social," he observed, "and therefore psychological. Madame Pemberton watches the garden from habit. She is mistress of these lands. Mademoiselle Miranda prefers to observe people, see how her chair faces the room. The colonel chooses his back to the wall, watching both garden and guests. Each positioning reveals character, and character reveals motive." Mrs. Henley, the sharp-eyed housekeeper, proved invaluable when questioned. Her account of the supernatural sightings was remarkably detailed, but one particular revelation caught Poirot's attention. "Mademoiselle Miranda has been visiting frequently of late." "Oh yes, sir, nearly every weekend since midsummer. Claimed concern for her ladyship's welfare, though they'd hardly spoken since Sir Reginald's funeral. Always brought flowers from her London garden, white roses she did. Said they reminded her of happier times." After Mrs. Henley departed, Poirot examined the drawing-room fireplace with renewed interest. The ashes were neat, the grate raked with characteristic English precision. Yet when he stirred gently with the poker, a blackened curl of paper detached, revealing a corner, with an embossed edge and the faint ghost of violet ink. "Lady Pemberton burned with order," he said quietly. "But last night, someone else burned in haste." He let the fragment fall and dusted his hands meticulously. "We are dealing with a mind of considerable cunning, Hastings. This crime has been planned with meticulous care, using the victim's own fears as a weapon. The ghost sighting, the shattered door, the white rose, all carefully orchestrated to create the appearance of supernatural intervention while concealing very human malice." He turned to me with that expression I knew well, the look of a man whose little gray cells had detected a crucial pattern. "But like all clever criminals, our murderer has made one critical error. They have been too clever, too theatrical. The very perfection of their staging betrays them." "What error?" "Patience, mon ami. First, we must question each suspect individually. Beginning, I think, with the charming Mademoiselle Miranda, who brings white roses to a house where they no longer grow. Hercule Poirot arrived at Greystone Manor precisely at 9:30, stepping from the hired motor car with that characteristic precision that marked every aspect of his existence. His small, compact figure was immaculate despite the morning's journey, patent leather shoes gleaming against the damp gravel, his dark suit pressed to perfection, and his magnificent moustache waxed to military precision. He surveyed the ancient manor with those penetrating green eyes that missed nothing, taking in the Gothic stonework, the mist-shrouded gardens, and the general atmosphere of genteel decay. "Bonjour, mon ami." He greeted me warmly, though I detected that familiar gleam of professional interest already kindling in his expression. "So, we have a mystery most intriguing, n'est-ce pas? A ghost that kills, a rose that appears from nowhere, and a lady who dies of fear. The little grey cells, they are already most stimulated." Inspector Davies, who had remained at the manor to oversee the removal of Lady Pemberton's body, regarded Poirot with barely concealed skepticism. "Monsieur Poirot," Davies began, extending a hand that Poirot shook with delicate precision. "I've heard of your reputation, naturally, though I must say, we have the matter well in hand. Clear case of natural death brought on by shock." Poirot's smile remained perfectly cordial as he began his examination. Unlike Davies' cursory investigation, he moved through the shattered conservatory with methodical precision. He knelt among the glass fragments, examining their distribution with a magnifying glass produced from his waistcoat pocket. "Très intéressant," he murmured, carefully lifting the white rose with his handkerchief. "Observe, Hastings, This rose has been cut with professional skill. See the clean diagonal slice at the stem's base? This is the work of an experienced gardener, not someone who merely plucked a flower in haste. He moved to examine the shattered door frame with particular attention. The glass fragments, Inspector, blown inward, yet no footprints disturb the soft earth beyond the threshold. The mist fell late. The ground kept the memory of feet. It remembers none. Miranda entered the morning room with calculated composure, though I noticed her hands trembled slightly as she arranged her skirts. Poirot positioned himself where the morning light would illuminate her face, while leaving his own expression partially shadowed. "Mademoiselle, please accept my condolences for your loss," Poirot began with characteristic politeness. "Indeed it is tragic," Miranda replied, though her tone carried a curious flatness. "Though I confess our relationship had become strained in recent years. Financial disagreements, you understand. The white roses that Mrs. Henley mentioned. A touching gesture, bringing flowers from your London garden. She detested them," Miranda said with sudden vehemence, "called them morbid reminders. But they were Papa's favorites, and I felt someone should remember." Her voice hardened. "Greystone Manor has been in our family for 3 centuries. She was merely a temporary custodian." Poirot's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Temporary? You speak as though you expected her tenure to end soon." "I speak practically, Monsieur Poirot. She was 62 years old with a weak heart." Dr. Thornfield proved equally revealing under Poirot's methodical questioning. His professional demeanor masked considerable anxiety, particularly when discussing Lady Pemberton's medical history. "Her heart condition was manageable with proper medication," he explained. "However, she had become increasingly resistant to treatment in recent months. The prescribed digitalis made her feel weak and confused," she claimed. "Digitalis," Poirot repeated thoughtfully. "A cardiac stimulant in small doses, but potentially lethal if concentrated. The peculiar odor you detected last night. A faint, sweet scent. Not perfume, not orchid. Consistent with certain cardiac glycosides, perhaps, though without a full autopsy, it's merely speculation." Mr. Blackwood's interview revealed the most significant development. As family solicitor, he possessed intimate knowledge that cast the entire situation in a dramatically different light. "The will is quite specific," he explained with legal precision. "Miranda inherits the estate only upon Lady Pemberton's death. Provided she remains unmarried, any romantic attachment would forfeit her claim entirely." Poirot's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. This revelation transformed every previous statement into potential deception. Colonel Ashford entered with military bearing intact, though his restless energy suggested a man accustomed to action rather than drawing-room conversations. "Colonel, your connection to the Pemberton family?" "Served with Reginald in India. We maintained correspondence after his marriage, though Lady Pemberton and I had philosophical differences regarding certain matters." "What manner of differences?" Ashford's jaw tightened. "She disapproved of my relationship with her stepdaughter, considered Miranda's affections misplaced given our difference in age and circumstances." "You and Mademoiselle Miranda are attached?" "We have an understanding, informal, given her financial dependence upon Lady Pemberton, or rather, her former dependence." As the interviews concluded, Poirot gathered his observations with characteristic precision. "We have discovered most illuminating contradictions, Hastings. Mademoiselle Miranda speaks of financial strain, yet inherits everything upon her stepmother's death, provided she remains unmarried. Colonel Ashford admits to romantic attachment that would cost his beloved her entire inheritance. Dr. Thornfield mentions digitalis, a substance that in concentration could cause the very symptoms we observed." He paused, stroking his mustache thoughtfully. "The white rose, cut with professional skill, the shattered door with no footprints, the convenient destruction of threatening letters, each element suggests careful planning, yet the very perfection of the staging betrays human artifice." Inspector Davies, growing impatient, announced his intention to arrest Colonel Ashford based on motive and opportunity. Poirot, however, requested patience until evening. "The theatre is not yet complete, Inspector. Our murderer has staged this performance with meticulous care, using fear itself as a weapon. But like all clever criminals, they have been too theatrical, too perfect. The little grey cells detect a pattern that demands one final act before the curtain falls." As afternoon shadows lengthened across Greystone's ancient stones, I sensed we approached the crucial moment when Poirot would reveal the truth hidden beneath layers of deception and misdirection. The afternoon brought Inspector Davies to a state of barely contained satisfaction as he surveyed the evidence accumulated through Poirot's methodical interviews. "The matter appears quite straightforward now, Monsieur Poirot," he announced with characteristic English confidence. "Colonel Ashford possesses clear motive. His romantic attachment to Miss Miranda, which would have cost her the entire inheritance under the original will. He was positioned perfectly to observe Lady Pemberton's reaction to the staged apparition, and his military background provides the tactical mind necessary for such elaborate deception." Poirot, however, remained absorbed in examining the conservatory's damaged framework with his magnifying glass. "Inspector, observe this brass hinge. See the faint abrasion here, as if a filament has run repeatedly across the metal. And notice this minute fleck of graphite near the inner sill, perhaps used to smooth a mechanical operation." Before Davies could respond, Mrs. Henley approached with the stooped figure of Mr. Price, Greystone's head gardener. The elderly man touched his cap respectfully, his weathered hands still bearing the soil of decades spent tending the estate's grounds. "Dreadful business about her ladyship," Price murmured. "She loved her orchids proper, but never would have white roses about the place. Said they put a chill in her bones, reminded her too much of mourning." Poirot carefully unwrapped the mysterious white rose from his handkerchief, presenting it for the gardener's expert examination. "Monsieur Price, what does this cutting suggest to your experienced eye?" The old man peered closely, then grunted with professional recognition. "Clean diagonal slice, sharp blade. Florist's work, not garden cutting. And see that sheen on the stem? That's glycerin, keeps the bloom fresh for transport. We've no white roses at Greystone, and no call for such preservation techniques." This revelation prompted Poirot to examine the conservatory's positioning more carefully. Standing where Lady Pemberton had sat the previous evening, he traced sight lines to the garden windows with mathematical precision. The mechanical ghost theory gains credence, Hastings. A figure suspended on strings, manipulated from within the house through this damaged hinge mechanism. The glycerin-preserved rose, professionally prepared in London, suggests elaborate premeditation. At precisely this moment, Mrs. Henley returned with disturbing news. "Begging your pardon, gentlemen, but I've discovered another letter beneath Lady Pemberton's bedroom door. Same violet ink, same threatening language, but—" She hesitated meaningfully. "It's dated 2 days hence, as if the writer expected to continue their campaign well beyond her ladyship's death." Inspector Davies examined the pristine envelope with visible frustration. "Impossible. The house has been under watch since last night. No one could have entered undetected." "The ink is fresh," Poirot observed, holding the letter to the afternoon light, "applied within recent hours. Yet observe the paper quality, identical to the destroyed correspondence, suggesting our letter writer maintains considerable supplies." Most methodical, this criminal mind. Davies, seizing upon what appeared to be conclusive evidence, announced his intention to arrest Colonel Ashford immediately. "Consider the facts, Monsieur Poirot. The Colonel benefits directly from Lady Pemberton's death through his relationship with the heiress. His positioning in the drawing-room provided perfect opportunity to stage the supernatural distraction. His military training explains the tactical sophistication evident throughout this crime." Poirot, however, raised a delicate hand in gentle protest. "Ah, Inspector, you arrest the obvious suspect while ignoring subtle contradictions that reveal deeper truths. This murder required intimate knowledge of the victim's medical condition, unrestricted access to her private chambers, and the ability to move freely throughout the house without arousing suspicion. Moreover, our murderer possessed sufficient botanical expertise to select and prepare that white rose with professional precision. The Belgian detective's green eyes gleamed with intellectual satisfaction as he continued his systematic dismantling of Davy's theory. When a case appears too straightforward, when motive and opportunity align with such perfect harmony, one must look deeper. The little grey cells tell me that Colonel Ashford's apparent guilt is merely the most vibrant colour in a carefully painted picture, designed to draw our attention away from the subtle brushstrokes that betray the true artist behind this deadly performance. Miranda had grown increasingly pale during this exchange, her hands trembling as she arranged her skirts with nervous precision. Dr. Thornfield maintained professional composure, though his frequent glances toward the garden suggested considerable internal agitation. Mr. Blackwood adjusted his spectacles repeatedly, his legal mind clearly processing the implications of each revelation. "The murderer is not a brute, Inspector," Poirot declared with quiet intensity. "They are a manipulator of circumstances and fear itself, using Lady Pemberton's own terrors as the murder weapon. They have staged supernatural vengeance while concealing very human malice beneath layers of misdirection." As evening shadows lengthened across Greystone's ancient stones, Poirot requested that all suspects gather in the drawing room for his final exposition. "Tonight, we shall witness the unmasking of a most clever criminal, one who transformed psychological warfare into actual murder, staging ghostly theatre to conceal deadly reality." The drawing room at Greystone Manor had transformed into a theatre of tension as evening shadows lengthened across the ancient stones. Poirot arranged the gathering with characteristic precision, positioning each suspect where their reactions would be most revealing. Miranda sat near the French windows, her profile etched against the darkening glass, while Colonel Ashford maintained his military bearing by the fireplace. Dr. Thornfield occupied the central seating area, his professional composure masking considerable anxiety, and Mr. Blackwood hovered near his legal documents with the nervous energy of a man whose orderly world had been shattered. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began with formal courtesy, his voice carrying that hypnotic quality that marked his most penetrating analyses. "We gather tonight to examine not merely the physical evidence of Lady Pemberton's death, but the psychological currents that made such a tragedy inevitable. Fear, you see, is the most primitive of human emotions. It can stop the heart, cloud the mind, and make the impossible seem credible." Inspector Davies shifted uncomfortably, clearly expecting confirmation of Colonel Ashford's guilt. Instead, Poirot moved to the fireplace and carefully stirred the ashes with delicate precision, retrieving another charred fragment of violet-inked correspondence. Our murderer understood fear's fundamental power and weaponized Lady Pemberton's deepest terrors against her. The threatening letters, the ghostly apparitions, the white roses, all calculated to create a state of psychological vulnerability that would make the final assault upon her weakened heart devastatingly effective. Miranda's composure cracked slightly at the mention of white roses, her fingers tracing nervous patterns on her skirt. Colonel Ashford's jaw tightened, though his military discipline held firm. "But let us examine the mechanics of this supernatural deception," Poirot continued, moving toward the boarded conservatory doors. "A ghost, mes amis, requires physical manifestation. The damaged hinge, the minute fleck of graphite I discovered, these suggest a mechanism of considerable ingenuity." He produced from his waistcoat a length of fine silvery thread, examining it in the lamplight. A figure suspended on nearly invisible filaments, manipulated through the conservatory's hinge mechanism. The mist provided perfect concealment, while the operator remained safely within the house. No footprints, no intruder, only the terror that such an apparition would inspire in a woman already tormented by threatening correspondence. Dr. Thornfield's professional mask slipped momentarily. The medical implications are significant, he admitted reluctantly. Fear accelerates the heart rate, increases blood pressure. In someone with Lady Pemberton's cardiac condition. Precisely, Doctor. Fear became the murder weapon, but it required expert knowledge to deploy effectively. Consider the white rose, cut with professional skill, preserved with glycerin, selected specifically for its psychological impact upon the victim. This suggests not merely research, but intimate familiarity with botanical techniques and Lady Pemberton's emotional triggers. The room fell silent, except for the soft ticking of the mantel clock. Poirot held up the charred paper fragment, examining it against the firelight. The threatening letters served multiple purposes. They established a pattern of external menace while concealing the true source of danger. Yet observe the handwriting. Educated, precise, bearing the distinctive characteristics of someone intimately familiar with Lady Pemberton's correspondence. The violet ink, the embossed paper, these details speak of access to her personal stationery. Mr. Blackwood adjusted his spectacles nervously. Handwriting analysis can be suggestive, but hardly conclusive. Indeed, monsieur, but when combined with other evidence, it forms part of a larger pattern. The murderer required unrestricted access to the house, intimate knowledge of the victim's medical condition, and the botanical expertise to prepare that symbolic white rose. They needed to move freely without arousing suspicion, to manipulate Lady Pemberton's medication, and to stage their supernatural theater with perfect timing. Miranda's hands trembled visibly as she clutched her handkerchief. Are you suggesting someone in this room orchestrated such an elaborate deception? I suggest, mademoiselle, that we are dealing with a mind of considerable cunning, one that transformed psychological warfare into actual murder. The beauty of this crime lies not in its physical execution, but in its psychological sophistication. The murderer required no conventional weapon save the victim's own medical condition and emotional state. Colonel Ashford stepped forward with characteristic directness. Monsieur Poirot, if you have specific accusations to make, please state them plainly. Ah, but Colonel, directness serves our murderer's purposes perfectly. They have constructed an elaborate performance designed to cast suspicion upon you. Your romantic attachment to Mademoiselle Miranda provides perfect motive, while your military background suggests the tactical sophistication evident in this crime's execution. Yet the little gray cells detect a more subtle intelligence at work. Poirot moved to examine Lady Pemberton's medicine cabinet, producing a small key from his waistcoat. 2 bottles, he observed, lifting them delicately. Digitalis tablets for her heart condition and valerian tincture for her nerves, in proper doses, restorative. In excess, the heart becomes a battlefield, as Dr. Thornfield well knows. The doctor's composure finally showed signs of strain. Any abuse of cardiac medication would be extremely dangerous, but without a proper autopsy. The sweet odor you detected, Doctor, consistent with certain cardiac glycosides, perhaps concentrated and administered through that perfectly preserved white rose. The glycerin treatment would make an ideal vehicle for such a substance, would it not? The tension in the room had become almost palpable. Each suspect sat frozen, aware that Poirot's methodical analysis was closing around them like a carefully constructed net. Yet the Belgian detective's green eyes revealed satisfaction rather than conclusion. He was building toward revelation, but the final act remained unplayed. The murderer sits among us, Poirot declared with quiet certainty, believing their performance has succeeded. They have created what appears to be the perfect crime, using fear itself as their primary weapon. But the little gray cells have detected the pattern beneath their elaborate deception, and tomorrow, when the village chemist examines these medicine bottles and Mr. Price inspects the conservatory mechanism, the final pieces of this psychological puzzle will fall into place. As if summoned by his words, a distant crash echoed through the manor's ancient corridors, followed by the unmistakable sound of splintering glass. The game, it seemed, was far from over. The crash reverberated through Greystone's ancient corridors like thunder, shattering the tents, atmosphere of Poirot's psychological analysis. We rushed toward the sound, Inspector Davies fumbling for his torch, while our assembled suspects followed with expressions ranging from genuine alarm to barely concealed calculation. The destruction had occurred in Sir Reginald's former study, now transformed into a scene of deliberate chaos. The tall window facing the garden hung in jagged fragments, books lay scattered across Persian carpets, and the mahogany desk that had once held the family's most private documents stood stripped bare. Yet unlike the conservatory's mysterious damage, this destruction bore unmistakably human fingerprints. "Mon Dieu," Poirot breathed, his keen eyes cataloguing every detail with methodical precision. "Our murderer grows desperate, n'est-ce pas? This theatrical display suggests someone seeks to destroy evidence while creating additional confusion." Among the scattered debris, Poirot's attention fixed upon several crucial discoveries. Near the fireplace, charred fragments of legal documents bore the distinctive embossed letterhead of Blackwood's firm. More significantly, the remnants of red sealing wax still bore the reversed impression of Sir Reginald's family crest. "A codicil," Mr. Blackwood admitted reluctantly when pressed, his professional composure cracking under Poirot's relentless questioning. "Lady Pemberton commissioned it just last week. She had discovered certain financial irregularities in the estate accounts and wished to place the inheritance in trust pending a complete audit." Miranda's face drained of color. "You never mentioned any irregularities. What kind of discrepancies?" "Unauthorized expenditures, forged signatures on legal documents, systematic embezzlement spanning several years," Blackwood continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Lady Pemberton suspected someone had been stealing from the estate since Sir Reginald's death. The audit would have exposed everything." This revelation transformed the entire complexion of our investigation. Financial desperation provided motive far more compelling than romantic attachment or inheritance disputes. Someone faced exposure, disgrace, and possible imprisonment. Poirot's examination of the window frame revealed additional evidence of the murderer's mechanical deception. Fine scratches in the brass fittings, microscopic fragments of fishing line caught in the damaged hinges, and traces of graphite used to lubricate the ghost apparatus, all confirming his theory about the supernatural manifestations. "Observe how our criminals' methods evolve," Poirot declared, holding up a strand of nearly invisible filament. "The first crime required months of careful planning. Psychological warfare using Lady Pemberton's own fears as the murder weapon. But tonight's destruction represents pure desperation. They heard my afternoon analysis and realized their elaborate deception faced imminent exposure." Dr. Thornfield, who had remained unusually quiet during the examination, finally spoke with visible strain. "The financial audit Lady Pemberton mentioned. She had asked my advice about certain charitable dispositions. She felt the estate had been mismanaged since her husband's death." Colonel Ashford's military bearing remained intact, though his calculating gaze moved from suspect to suspect with new understanding. Then the threatening letters, the ghost sightings, the psychological torment, all designed to prevent that audit from proceeding. "Precisely, Colonel. Our murderer faced a deadline. Lady Pemberton's investigation would have revealed years of systematic theft. The supernatural theater was intended to drive her to natural death through cardiac failure, making the codicil irrelevant and the audit unnecessary." Miranda found her voice, though it trembled with emotion. But who had access to Papa's accounts? Who could forge his signature convincingly enough to fool the banks? Poirot's green eyes gleamed with intellectual satisfaction as he surveyed the calculated destruction surrounding us. Someone with intimate knowledge of family business practices, unrestricted access to private documents, and the professional expertise to manipulate legal and financial instruments without arousing suspicion. The Belgian detective moved toward the portrait of Sir Reginald, which hung undisturbed despite the surrounding chaos. "Observe what remains untouched, mes amis. The family photographs, the memorial objects. Our destroyer respects the dead while violating the living. This suggests emotional connection, not mere criminal opportunism. As midnight approached, Inspector Davies posted additional constables throughout the manor, while Poirot requested that all suspects remain available for his final exposition the following evening. "The endgame approaches," Poirot declared with quiet certainty. "Our criminal has played their final card, destroying evidence in a desperate attempt to prevent exposure. But like all gamblers facing ruin, they have overplayed their hand. The little grey cells now perceive the complete pattern, years of financial deception culminating in psychological murder when discovery threatened." The ancient manor seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the final act of this deadly drama to unfold. Morning brought a brittle brightness to Greystone Manor, the kind of clear, cold light that strips shadows of their mystery without quite dispelling the underlying menace. Poirot breakfasted with his customary fastidiousness before requesting an examination of the estate's outbuildings. The autumn mist clung to the gardens like a shroud, creating an atmosphere perfectly suited to the revelations that lay ahead. "We seek not the flowers this morning, Hastings, but the strings that guide them," Poirot declared as we approached the potting sheds with Mr. Price. "The little grey cells tell me that our ghost required a most earthly foundation." The potting shed revealed its secrets reluctantly. Beneath a shelf of terracotta pots, Poirot discovered a wooden crate containing the remnants of an elaborate deception. A length of muslin, stiff with starch, lay beside lead fishing weights attached to nearly invisible filament. Most significantly, a small pulley, smudged with graphite, had been precisely crafted to fit the conservatory's window frame. "Voila," Poirot breathed, examining the mechanism with his magnifying glass. "The ghost's skeleton, constructed with remarkable precision. Observe these knots, Hastings. They are not the simple bows of a gardener, but specialized fastenings designed to withstand sudden tension while remaining invisible from a distance." Among the apparatus, a tiny brass nozzle no larger than a thimble caught his attention. "An atomizer fragment," he murmured, wrapping it carefully in his handkerchief. "Note the faint sweetness. Not perfume, but something far more sinister." Our investigation led us back to Sir Reginald's devastated study, where Poirot's overnight examination had yielded a crucial discovery that everyone else had overlooked. Among the scattered debris, he knelt not beside the obvious fragments of legal documents, but near the edge of the mahogany desk, where a tiny sliver of wood had been chipped away. "Observe this minute detail, mon ami," Poirot said, producing his magnifying glass. "The chip is fresh, revealing lighter wood beneath the darkened patina. But see how clean the break is, as if made by a precisely crafted tool rather than blunt destruction." Within the grain of the wood splinter, faint impressions were visible, a circular mark and series of parallel lines. "The mark of a jeweler's loop," Poirot declared with intellectual satisfaction, "and the fine lines from an engraver's vice. Our criminal possesses skills far beyond simple theft, Hastings. They are a craftsman of deception." The village chemist's analysis confirmed Poirot's suspicions about the atomizer fragment. Concentrated digitalis, extracted and refined far beyond therapeutic doses, had been delivered through an ingenious method that combined botanical chemistry with psychological warfare. The white rose's glycerin preservation had provided perfect concealment for liquid poison that would absorb through skin contact. "The systematic nature of this crime becomes clear," Poirot explained as we examined the reconstructed financial documents. Years of meticulous forgery, each signature copied with the precision of an expert craftsman. The same steady hand that created convincing legal documents also constructed that elaborate ghost mechanism. We are dealing with someone who values precision above all else, whether manipulating small mechanical components or human psychology. Mrs. Henley's testimony provided additional confirmation without revealing the criminal's identity. Her ladyship had been questioning certain irregularities in the accounts, she explained with evident distress. Orders for items that never arrived, payments to suppliers who seemed unfamiliar. She'd grown quite suspicious in recent weeks. Poirot's green eyes gleamed with intellectual triumph as he arranged the evidence with characteristic precision. Our murderer faced exposure of years of systematic theft when Lady Pemberton's audit threatened to reveal their deception. They chose psychological murder over simple flight, using intimate knowledge of her medical condition and emotional vulnerabilities as their primary weapons. The Belgian detective moved to the window, gazing out at the mist-shrouded gardens where the ghostly theatre had been staged. The threatening letters created a narrative of external menace while concealing the true source of danger. The apparitions provided supernatural explanation for her death while masking very human malice. The white rose served both as psychological weapon and poison delivery system, a masterpiece of criminal ingenuity. As afternoon shadows lengthened across Greystone's ancient stones, Poirot requested that all suspects gather in the drawing room for his final exposition. Tonight, we shall witness the unmasking of a most clever criminal, one who transformed technical expertise into murder weapon and psychological insight into deadly theatre. The little grey cells have detected every flaw in their supposedly perfect crime, and justice shall finally claim its due. The stage was set for the final act of this elaborate performance, where precision craftsmanship would be revealed as the signature of a mind capable of both systematic deception and calculated murder. Evening settled upon Greystone Manor like a velvet shroud as we assembled in the drawing room for Poirot's final exposition. The Belgian detective had arranged the gathering with characteristic precision, positioning each suspect where the lamplight would illuminate their expressions while leaving his own face partially shadowed. Inspector Davies sat rigidly with his notebook, still convinced of Colonel Ashford's guilt, while the suspects themselves displayed varying degrees of composure that spoke volumes about their inner states. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice carrying that hypnotic quality that commanded absolute attention. We gather tonight to examine not merely the physical evidence of Lady Pemberton's death, but the psychological architecture of a crime that transformed fear itself into a murder weapon. Before us sits a killer whose technical expertise rivals their understanding of human nature, a craftsman of deception who spent years perfecting both financial fraud and psychological warfare. He moved to display the evidence collected from his methodical investigation. The muslin ghost apparatus, the atomizer fragment, the specialized fishing line, and the charred document remains. Let us begin by eliminating the obvious suspects through logical deduction. Poirot turned first to Colonel Ashford, who maintained his military bearing despite the mounting pressure. Colonel, you possess clear motive through your attachment to Mademoiselle Miranda, and your tactical mind could conceive such elaborate deception. Yet you lack the necessary intimacy with Lady Pemberton's medical regimen and household routines. More significantly, the knots used in the ghost apparatus were not the practical fastenings of a soldier, but the precise work of someone who crafts delicate mechanisms by lamplight. Your strength lies in field improvisation, not workshop precision. Miranda's hands trembled as Poirot's attention shifted to her. Mademoiselle, your resentment toward Lady Pemberton was genuine, and you brought white roses to a house that rejected them. However, the florist confirms your recent orders were for cream blooms, not funeral white. Moreover, the codicil would have placed the estate in trust pending audit. Even Lady Pemberton's death would not have freed your inheritance until those financial irregularities were resolved. The motive you appear to possess is diminished by practical considerations. Mr. Blackwood adjusted his spectacles nervously as Poirot continued his systematic elimination. Monsieur Blackwood, your access to legal documents and sealing wax makes you a natural suspect, yet you possess neither the botanical knowledge to preserve roses in glycerin nor the medical expertise to calculate lethal digitalis concentrations. Your hands show ink stains, but no trace of the graphite that would mark someone who constructed mechanical devices. You are guilty of negligence, perhaps cowardice, but not murder." With theatrical precision, Poirot produced the reconstructed ghost apparatus and positioned it near the boarded conservatory doors. Observe the technical sophistication required for this deception. The lead weights, the specialized pulley system, the nearly invisible filaments. Each component reveals a mind that values precision above all else. The same steady hand that forged Sir Reginald's signature for years also constructed this elaborate mechanism. Dr. Thornfield's professional composure showed hairline cracks as Poirot lifted the atomizer fragment. The poison delivery system demonstrates equal sophistication. Concentrated digitalis, refined far beyond therapeutic doses, administered through skin contact via the glycerin-preserved white rose. Only someone with intimate knowledge of cardiac pharmacology could calculate such precise concentrations. The room fell into profound silence as Poirot continued his methodical analysis. The threatening letters served multiple purposes, establishing external menace while concealing the true source of danger. Yet observe the vocabulary: paroxysm, decompensation, irregular conduction. These are not the words of a rustic avenger, but the precise terminology of medical training. Poirot's green eyes swept across the assembled suspects with penetrating intensity. Our murderer required 3 distinctive capabilities that narrow the field considerably. First, unrestricted access to Lady Pemberton's private chambers and medical supplies. Second, the technical skills to forge documents and construct elaborate mechanical devices. Third, intimate understanding of her psychological vulnerabilities developed through long professional association. The Belgian detective moved toward the fireplace, his compact figure radiating quiet authority. The beauty of this crime lies not in its physical execution, but in its systematic exploitation of human psychology. Years of patient preparation transformed Lady Pemberton's own fears into the murder weapon, while financial desperation provided the ultimate motive when audit threatened exposure. As the mantel clock chimed the hour, Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper that commanded absolute attention. The murderer sits among us, believing their performance has succeeded. They have created what appears to be the perfect crime, supernatural vengeance masking very human malice. But like all criminals who consider themselves artists, they could not resist adding unnecessary flourishes that ultimately betrayed them. The accumulated weight of evidence pointed inexorably toward a conclusion that would shatter the careful facades maintained throughout this deadly performance. The little gray cells had detected every flaw in the supposedly perfect crime, and justice would finally claim its due. The silence stretched taut as a wire before Poirot's voice cut through it with surgical precision. "Dr. Thornfield," he announced, his green eyes fixed upon the family physician with unwavering intensity, "you are the architect of this elaborate deception, a craftsman who transformed medical knowledge into murder weapon and psychological insight into deadly theater." The doctor's professional composure cracked like fine porcelain. His hands, which had maintained steady precision throughout years of medical practice, began to tremble as Poirot methodically dismantled his carefully constructed facade. "Consider, if you please, 3 instruments that compose this symphony of murder: the pen, the pulley, and the poison. Each required specialized expertise that only you possessed." Poirot moved with theatrical precision, displaying the evidence that would seal the doctor's fate. First, the pen. The threatening letters that terrorized Lady Pemberton were written with intimate knowledge of her medical anxieties. The vocabulary betrayed you, Doctor: paroxysm, decompensation, irregular conduction. These are not the words of a rustic avenger, but the precise terminology you used during her private consultations. The violet ink came from her own desk, to which you had unrestricted access during your medical visits. Dr. Thornfield's face had drained of color, but his voice remained steady. "These are merely theories, Monsieur Poirot. Circumstantial evidence at best. But we have much more than theories. Poirot lifted the atomizer fragment with his handkerchief. Second, the poison. Your medical expertise enabled the perfect murder weapon. Concentrated digitalis, refined far beyond therapeutic doses. The sweet odor you so carefully detected last night was the lingering scent of the very substance you had administered. The white rose served as your delivery system, its glycerin preservation providing the perfect medium for skin absorption. The Belgian detective moved to display the reconstructed ghost apparatus. Third, the pulley. This mechanical sophistication reveals hands trained in delicate work. The specialized knots, the precisely balanced weights, the graphite-lubricated system, all constructed with the same attention to detail that marks your surgical procedures. In your village surgery, we discovered the jeweler's loop and engraver's vice that left their marks on Sir Reginald's desk. Miranda gasped audibly as the implications became clear. The financial irregularities. You've been stealing from the estate. Indeed, mademoiselle. For years, Dr. Thornfield systematically embezzled funds, forging signatures on medical supply orders, creating phantom treatments. When Lady Pemberton's audit threatened exposure, financial desperation drove him to murder. Poirot's voice carried a note of profound sadness. You possessed the intelligence to conceive this elaborate crime, the technical skills to execute it with precision, and the psychological insight to weaponize Lady Pemberton's own fears against her. The doctor's professional mask finally collapsed entirely. She was going to ruin me. After all I'd done for this family, all the years of service. She wouldn't listen, wouldn't stop prying into matters that didn't concern her. His voice rose to a guttural cry, betraying years of carefully hidden resentment. You transformed your patient's trust into a weapon, Doctor, Poirot concluded with quiet authority. You exploited her medical vulnerabilities, staged supernatural theater to mask very human malice, and when discovery threatened, you chose murder over confession. But like all criminals who consider themselves artists, you could not resist unnecessary flourishes that ultimately betrayed you. Inspector Davies stepped forward with handcuffs that seemed offensively practical amid Greystone's antique grace. Dr. Thornfield did not resist as they led him away, though his eyes lingered upon the dark conservatory windows where his ghostly deception had played out its final act. As the house exhaled the long breath it had held since Lady Pemberton's death, Poirot reflected quietly. The most dangerous criminals, mes amis, are those who convince themselves their crimes serve a greater good. Dr. Thornfield told himself he was merely correcting financial inequities, but greed and fear transformed a healer into a killer. The little gray cells had triumphed once again, exposing the human malice that lurked beneath layers of supernatural deception and professional respectability. The door closed upon Dr. Thornfield with finality that seemed to release Greystone Manor from its malevolent spell. Inspector Davies returned within hours with damning evidence from the doctor's surgery. False invoices, forged prescriptions, the remaining digitalis concentrate, and most tellingly, the jeweler's loop and engraver's vice that had left their telltale marks on Sir Reginald's desk. The systematic embezzlement totaled nearly £3,000 over 5 years, each theft executed with the same meticulous precision that had characterized the murder itself. Vanity Hastings, Poirot observed as we examined the evidence, always it betrays the clever criminal. Dr. Thornfield could not resist the surgeon's knot for his ghost apparatus, the medical vocabulary in his threatening letters, the perfect calibration of his poison dosage. Each flourish proclaimed his professional expertise as clearly as a signed confession. Miranda approached us in the morning room, her composure restored though shadows remained beneath her eyes. The inheritance would proceed, subject to comprehensive audit, while her relationship with Colonel Ashford faced a future freed from both financial obstacles and murderous interference. Mr. Blackwood, chastened by his oversight, promised rigorous examination of all estate accounts to separate legitimate assets from the doctor's illicit gains. The human capacity for self-deception never ceases to amaze. Poirot reflected as we prepared for departure. Dr. Thornfield convinced himself that years of theft were merely borrowing, that Lady Pemberton's death was regrettable necessity rather than calculated murder. The mind creates elaborate justifications to preserve the ego's integrity, but truth possesses its own inexorable power. The conservatory had been restored to tranquility, its shattered glass replaced, the mechanical apparatus removed. Yet the memory of Lady Pemberton's final terror would forever haunt these walls. Poirot stood among the orchids that had witnessed such elaborate deception, his green eyes reflecting profound sadness. The most tragic aspect lies not in the deception itself, but in the fundamental corruption of the healing arts. Her physician, sworn to protect her health, transformed medical knowledge into murder weapon and exploited her psychological vulnerabilities with calculating precision. Professional trust, once betrayed, leaves wounds that never fully heal. As our motor car wound through the countryside toward London, I reflected upon the psychological sophistication of the crime we had solved. The doctor's technical expertise was remarkable, Poirot. That ghost apparatus required considerable mechanical ingenuity. Indeed, mon ami, but observe how his greatest strength became his ultimate weakness. The precision that made him an excellent physician also marked him as our murderer. Those specialized knots that carefully calibrated poison dosage, the systematic approach to psychological warfare. Each element bore his professional signature. Poirot adjusted his coat with characteristic fastidiousness as London's smokestacks appeared on the horizon. Lady Pemberton died not from supernatural vengeance, but from betrayal of professional trust. The little grey cells have solved another puzzle, but they cannot restore her life or erase the terror of her final moments. Justice provides satisfaction, yet cannot undo the fundamental tragedy of trust betrayed and life destroyed. As our train pulled into Victoria Station, Poirot delivered his final observation with philosophical insight. The ghost in the garden window has been revealed as nothing more supernatural than human greed and professional corruption. The most elaborate mysteries invariably possess the most human solutions, and evil, no matter how cleverly disguised, cannot ultimately escape the inexorable power of methodical reasoning and moral clarity. The case was closed, its lessons lingering long after the files would be sealed, and the participants returned to their separate lives, forever chained by their encounter with calculated malice masquerading as professional competence. In the end, Hercule Poirot had once again demonstrated that when a crime seems to demand supernatural explanation, it most often requires nothing more than a mirror held up to human nature itself.